I mean, just first off, like, thanks, thanks to Stephen for inviting me, and also thanks for Lewis, Fred, and I don't know everybody on the Curious team, but thank you guys for inviting me and letting me present. I'm super happy to be here. So if there's one thing I can say is we're all stuck at home, and to make this as fun as possible, guys, like, please feel free to like unmute yourselves and just just straight out interrupt me and like ask your questions, because it'd be kind of lame if there's only one guy speaking for the next 90 minutes. So like, by all means, please don't feel shy. Like, unmute yourselves. Like, just throw questions, comments, scream if you need to scream, because the more people talk, the better it is for these online workshops. Awesome. So today's workshop I guess will really focus on being a really broad overview of web development. So more specifically, we'll be looking into HTML, CSS, and JavaScript. Just by unmuting yourselves and saying yes, sir, or maybe giving a little shout. Is this the first time who here is coding for the first time? Maybe unmute yourselves and say yes, sir, if you guys have coded before, but you guys are not super experienced.
Ooh, experienced people here.
I mean, I coded before in other languages, but web development, I'm pretty a beginner.
Nope, no problem. Sorry, this is Tyler, if I'm not mistaken.
No, I think that was Kryptonics.
Kryptonics. Okay, gotcha. Sounds good. I'm guessing everybody else is like experienced, if I'm if I'm not mistaken. All right. Well, I mean, in any case, it's for the fun of it. So I'm confident the workshop will go pretty smoothly. So all in all, to summarize what we'll be doing today is by exploring how to structure websites and how to add action and different functions to them. We'll be creating a final result where you'll be able to determine the eye color of Star Wars characters. So does anybody have a favorite character from Star Wars? Come on, guys. Like, I know the last few movies are absolutely trash, but like, does anybody have like a favorite character from Star Wars? Like, anybody?
R2D2.
R2. Okay, is this gonna work? R2D2. Let's see. So the idea is you're gonna create a website that uses both HTML, CSS, and JavaScript. So when you type in a character name, so let's say R2. Okay, this doesn't seem to work. Let me try that again. Oh yeah, there we go. So R2D2 has red eyes. So there was a spelling mistake. So basically, this website uses HTML, CSS, and JavaScript, kind of like the three building blocks of many websites available today. And using that, it can search. It connects to an external database and lets you know what color of eyes a certain Star Wars character has. Now, why this is really cool? Well, other than the fact that Star Wars is really lit, it really touches on many technologies that are used in web dev, as well as kind of like the cornerstone of how to structure websites and how to get them to talk to external services. So I guess that's enough of an intro, and we can definitely get started. If ever this is the first time anybody is writing code, you can always download a code editor on your computer. Personally, I use something called Sublime Text, which is, well, I mean, if you Google Sublime, that's Sublime, you download that, use the free version. It's pretty lit. However, for the sake of the workshop, if you don't have any text editors installed, I strongly recommend use REPL, and I'll be using that for today's demo. So I'll send the link in the Discord. Pull that it. I can't see the screen share. Okay, thanks, Liz, for responding to the channel. So REPL.it. So if you have a code editor, it should be pretty straightforward. For those using REPL, once you have an account or once you go on a website, just create a new REPL. We're going to choose HTML, CSS, JS. I'm going to call this Curious Workshop 2020 Hackathon. Awesome. And also for those, if anybody just joined in the last couple of minutes, in the workshop channel, there should also be a link to the source code that will be used for today's workshop in case there's any bugs or anything. Cool. So I guess we can get started. So I think it would be really awesome to make this like legit as interactive as possible. So in here we see we have 3 files: an HTML file, a CSS file, and a JavaScript file. Does anybody want to unmute themselves and maybe briefly explain what each of the 3 files do? So especially maybe somebody who has a bit of experience in web dev. Do you guys want to give it a shot? Okay, there's a there's an awkward silence, but I guess kind of a quick overview. So HTML basically is constructs the structure of a website. So like if you were to go on a website, all of the structure is HTML. CSS does the styling, so all the colors, all the shapes, and all the layout, that's the CSS. And the JavaScript is legit all of the action on a website. So if you were to click a form and send some data, or if you were to load, if you were to like load your favorite song from an external database, that all of that is JavaScript. So these 3 files are kind of the cornerstone of web dev. If anybody is using if anybody is using a code editor, all you need to do is just create 3 files called index.html, script.js, and style.css. And normally your computer should be able to recognize the file types automatically.
Laurence, just one thing. We actually got to 25 people, so if you wouldn't mind just turning off your camera,
Yep.
so more people can join.
Yep.
All right, great, thanks.
No problem. Thanks, Fred. So here we are. So to start off, we'll start with the HTML file. Like the way I personally like to think of it is, although it's really cool to have like action and styling and like all like a bunch of special effects, what's really nice is really just to start off with like the minimal essence of a website. Like, what do you want your program to do? So we'll focus on the HTML to start off with. Starting off, if this is your first time writing a website using HTML, it might seem a bit cryptic. Does anybody here have any experience with HTML? If you do, like, please unmute yourselves and say give like a shout or a battle cry.
I'm not doing a battle cry, but I did do some HTML.
I also have used it as well.
Yeah.
I also
Awesome. Who was the first person who spoke? Sorry, like I have a hard track visualizing on the Discord.
Keaton.
Keaton. Keaton, like, sorry to put you on the spot, but to make this as interactive as possible, would you happen to know what is the function of the head and body components of an HTML page?
Well, the head component is like information that the page needs, but that isn't shown to the user, while the body is like what is shown to the user. That's how I understand it.
Yep, that's exactly it. Like everything in head is, like you said, is just parameters that's used for the website, while body is all the components that are actually seen to populate the website. So on any HTML page, just know that you have the head. So I guess I'll make a comment. So anything that looks something like this is a comment, so the computer program just completely ignores it. So I'll write the head. This is just parameters, and the body. This is just, you can say, components, visual components. Cool. I guess like the next thing would be just to go through like what we have, like just the tags we have here initially. So as you noticed, possibly everything there's a bunch of tags. So what we call, for instance, you can see that there's like an HTML tag at the start and the HTML tag at the end, and everything else is kind of encapsulated within these tags. So this is really the basis of HTML. Everything is legit made up of tags. And you have tags that have different functions. For instance, this specifies that all of the stuff sandwiched between these HTML tags is HTML code. So the opening tag usually is just written with opening corner bracket, closing corner bracket. The closing tag has the same, except that there is usually a slash right before the tags. What we can say before the tag itself. And then you have some other tags, for instance, like Keaton said earlier, you have the head tag, so head open and close. Everything that's sandwiched in between the head is basically part of head. Same thing for body. So this is really the gist of it. Next thing I guess we can do is kind of delve into some of these preset tags that we have over here. Is anybody else familiar with web dev? Somebody who previously gave a battle cry a few minutes ago? I swear, I heard a few yeses, but I guess I'll just go ahead. So we have a few tags that I think are worth just going for it. So there's a meta tag. Usually, I wouldn't be too concerned about meta tags at this point, but it's really just specifying what we call metadata. So just some parameters for how your computer or your browser will display an HTML website. So in this case, this just specifies what type of character encoding we're using. We don't need to care about this in this case. We have another meta tag that specifies to what extent a screen, well, your web page should expand on the screen. So in this case, uh, this meta tag that references the viewport just says, well, for mobile devices, I want the content to fit nicely to kind of just stretch out. It's cool to have, but we don't really need to care about meta tags. Is anybody here familiar with the title tag?
Well, I could go. I've done a bit. I think the title tag is the tag that shows at the top, like in the tab.
Yep, that Fred is exactly on the spot. So that is it. So like in this case, I'm not sure how it could be visualized in REPL. So if I were to go to the one I have on my computer, I think it's Curious Hacks demo. If I were to write Star Wars 7 sucks. Wait, I can't do that because this is recorded. Let's say Star Wars is cool. You save that. You reload. Oh, and by the way, if anybody doing this in a code editor, you just have to click on the HTML file. Star Wars is cool. That's the title. Cool. And there's two more tags you have to go through, so just a bit more boring definitions before the stuff gets really, really sick. So, does anybody want to say what the link element does? I mean, we're slowly warming up. So, but the link element basically references a CSS file. So, CSS is styling. Any styles that we have in the CSS file will be referenced here. What's really important to note is that the href specifies your file name or where the file is stored. So the file name has to perfectly match the actual file name of the CSS file that you're referencing. The last thing we want to look into is the script tag. So like the link tag, script references the JavaScript file. So all of the code we have in script will be called into via this script tag. Just a note that would be useful, especially for today. Sometimes HTML web pages behave a bit weirdly, so it is common practice to keep the script tag towards the bottom in your body element. So that's kind of an overview of what REPL pre-generated, which I think is just a good slow introduction to HTML for those who are coding websites for the first time. So next step is how in the world are we going to code a website that when you type your favorite Star Wars character, for instance, Darth Vader, that allows it to return the eye color of that character. So how in the world are we going to do this? In a normal scenario, like it's always a cool idea to have a drawing board to kind of map things out. In this case, just for sake of time, I'll skip the drawing board step. But if we have time in the end, I'd gladly brainstorm with you guys like any alternative ways of doing this. So just kind of like just putting this out there. This is our end result. Does anybody have any ideas of how we can achieve this? Whether it's like what software we can use or what logical flow we can use to achieve this result? Do you guys have any ideas or any suggestions? Kryptonic, sorry for putting you on the spot, but I feel like you might have some ideas given that you've coded a bit before.
I mean, like, I guess we could have like a database, right? And we can like match the name to what's in the database and like return it.
That is a wicked smart idea, and that's actually exactly what we're going to try to do. So I don't know what you've been doing the last 24 hours, but like you hit the spot. So what we're going to do is we're going to do something that's even cooler than that. So we have to write, if we were to manually create a database of Star Wars characters and to write code to query through the database, it takes time, it's boring, it's repetitive. So we'll just use something that people already created. So it's called swapi.tech, I believe. I'll switch that up. So swapi.tech. I'll send this into the Discord channel for you guys to access. So the Star Wars API basically, it sounds really scary, but all it is this is a service that when you enter specific parameters, in this case character names, it's going to return the characteristics of that character. So, for instance, in this case, if you're to type this URL, https etc /people/1, you request that, it's going to return a person. So in this case, you have the properties of the person, like the name, gender, birth year, eye color, etc. So this is what we call a REST API. And REST APIs are really cool because just by typing a URL, for instance, just by typing a URL, you can access information from across the internet. So REST APIs are a really cool way for websites to retrieve data from other websites or other databases, and also eventually to send requests via REST API, so via these URL links to other websites. So this is cool. We'll be using this. The next question is, what can we do to integrate such an API into our website? I'm just gonna put people on the spot because we gotta make this interactive.
I don't know if this is true or not, but is that like returned as a JSON file?
Yeah, it's return exactly. So I'm not sure what the specific term is. It's in a JSON format, and it can be parsed using JavaScript. So I mean that was I think that was Kryptonics.
Yeah, that was me.
Yeah. So I mean that's kind of like a really nice start. So what we could do is through our website, we can somehow send a request to this swapi API server, have it return this JSON object, and basically just retrieve like specific information. So, for instance, in this case, there's a specific format that I'll send you guys. If we were to say, let's say R2D2, we'd have to figure out a way for our website to send R2D2 to this API server and somehow extract information from what it returns to us in a JSON format. So that's kind of it, kind of the essence of what we want to try to do. So I guess what we can start it with is really what we want to have initially on the website. To do this, what comes to mind are three elements. So like we can see over here in the demo, we have a input field, a submit button, and in this case we have a div, which I'll get into real shortly. All right, so I guess to start off, we'll create a input element. So input, as name implies, basically is a specific element that is recognized by your computer that allows the user to input data. So in this case, input, the type of the input is text, and we're going to give it, we are going to give it an ID. We'll call this equals, let's just call it SW name, for Star Wars name for short. All right. So just for context, type and ID are what we call attributes. So this is basically characteristics for the input form. If you guys are to run this, normally there should be a input box that pops up here. So it pops up right over there. All right. So I mean, it's a start. We have something, and and we're gonna slowly, progressively make a few more steps. I'm just gonna turn off my dark mode because it's interfering a bit with REPL. There you go. So like that's much more visible. So there's a input box there. The next thing we're gonna do is create a button. So does anybody want to guess what tag we can use to create a button in HTML?
Button.
Was that Keaton?
Yes.
Button it is. So button, what's cool about button is we can sandwich a name in between. Because this is an interactive workshop, do you guys have any ideas for a name we can use as a button name? I see somebody is called Melted. I mean, let me know if this is not okay, but I'll just call the button Melted because, why not, if that's all right with you.
Yeah, that's fine. I was just gonna suggest that maybe we could color red since we are naming it like red eyes.
Red? Sure. Awesome. So there we are. So you have your button. It's called red. Of course, you guys can type whatever you want inside and it will render that, but we'll call it red since it was a suggestion we have. Cool. And so, it's looking somewhat familiar. We have, the input box rather, the submit button, and in the end, we are gonna add a div element. Does anybody here already used div elements before? Does anybody want to give a guess of what they do?
Like I've done a tutorial on YouTube, and I just make like a sample website, and we use like div elements and stuff. I'm assuming they're like containers, but I also had a question, like what the difference is between using an ID and like a div.
I mean, to answer your first question, divs are exactly containers. Like a div basically kind of it's like it sandwiches HTML code and says, okay, so whatever is in this code is defined by certain properties. So it sounds abstract, but you'll see once you start like actually coding it, it becomes really intuitive to grasp. Your second question was, what's the difference between divs and IDs?
Yeah, since like you could style both of them, right?
Yeah, I mean that's a really good question. So, to my understanding, divs themselves are a type of tag. So it's like you can say, so just like the input tag, the body tag, and the image tag, a div tag is a tag. So it's a type. So it in itself acts as a block that encompasses a lot of code. The ID itself is an attribute, so it's like a property. The ID's job is to say if you were to have, let's say, a specific function you want to link to a certain block of code, you define that through the ID. So I'm not sure if that makes sense, but div is basically a block of code. ID is a property.
So I guess we could use div for like bigger containers of code, and ID's like specific, right?
Right. Because if you were to have, let's say, just one line of code, let's say button, you want to add an ID to the button. I mean, we're getting ahead of ourselves, but might as well. So let's say ID equals SW submit for Star Wars submit. I mean, that would be an ID for a button. Let's say you wanted to add an ID for like a bunch of buttons or like a bunch of tags. Well, it becomes tiresome to add them individually. So we can just specify, okay, div ID equals SW text, and everything that goes inside would have the same ID, would correspond to the same ID as we have in the div.
Okay, thank you.
No problem. And that actually, no, it's I mean, if anybody has any questions, please feel free. That really kind of encapsulates like the HTML component of today's workshop. So what we have is I'm just going to run this again. We have our input button, we have our submit button, and we have a div over here. And why we're using div is we want to create some sort of like receptor. So whatever the Star Wars API sends, we want it to be inputted over here, where you have the three dots right over here. So this is cool, but I mean, nothing really happens. So the big thing is how do we make the magic happen in all of this stuff? Does anybody have any suggestions or approaches to make some magic? Just a student, sorry for putting you on the spot, but like, do you happen to have any ideas or any approaches we could use? No worries. I guess, well, there's just one approach that personally I like to use using a JavaScript library called Jquery. For those, I'm not sure if anybody has done JavaScript before, but Jquery itself is pretty old school. But to me, at least, it's a really simple way of exploring JavaScript and how it can be integrated into websites. So we have Jquery, and we want to plug Jquery into our website. There's a couple of ways of doing it, but the simplest way is using a CDN. So I'll plug the link into the Discord below. Hold up. Jquery. So if you type Jquery CDN, we're going to take version 3. We're going to take minified. So minified, I'm going to copy that. I'm going to plug that into Discord. Can I HTML? Yeah, I can do that. Awesome. Cool. So you just take that and you plug that right on tops, right below, right in head. That calls the jQuery stuff inside. Cool. Things are looking lit. So again, nothing happens, but at least we have jQuery inside. So for the HTML, that's as advanced as we're going to get for today, since we're not focusing only on HTML, but rather on how these 3 files are interlinked. So the next step is to go into our JavaScript file. So JavaScript, I'm going to just get a glass of water. Cool. So what we can start off with is trying to access the value of what we have inside this text box. So one way of doing it, if I'm not mistaken, is by creating a variable. Let's say variable variable user text, and we're going to assign it to what's inside the text box here. So let's call it jQuery. jQuery. So we're gonna pull what we have from the text box, and we're gonna transfer that to the JavaScript. So since we have an ID tag, an ID attribute for the input box, we'll just copy the ID into JavaScript. So oh, whoops, my bad. That was wrong file. So var variable user text equals jQuery. We're going to put a string inside, so just text. So make sure you have open and close quotation marks. For IDs, always put a hashtag in front when you're coding in JavaScript. So don't use hashtags in HTML, but for JavaScript, to correctly recognize an ID tag, you always got to use a hashtag in front. So we're going to do this. Var user text equals jQuery dot SW name, hopefully, dot val, I believe, to get the value. We're going to put a semicolon at the end because that's the end of our line. And then next step, we're going to use console.log user text. So essentially what this should do is it plugs the value out of that and it logs it there. So we're going to run and see what happens. Oh, jQuery is not defined. Oh, this is interesting. I'll try the different approach. Does that work? Okay, that works. So for jQuery, like what we have is a $sign, which is a substitute for jQuery. So I can't remember how jQuery would like us to use it. So I believe jQuery is like that. But just for fun, instead of using jQuery, the developers wanted to use $signs, so just to make things a lot more simpler. Cool. So we have that. I'm gonna just check this channel real quick. Yep, I was in the CSS file. That was a bit of a mistake. So this isn't the JavaScript file. So as you see, nothing really happens. And the reason why nothing really happens is really because we're not really doing this right. Because we want to type something, click submit, and then trigger an action in the JavaScript file. So I mean, we can kind of comment this out for now because it wasn't the right approach, but we can try something else. So how to do this is, I believe in jQuery we can have event listeners. So I believe you first reference what you want to be listened to. So in this case, it's our button called SW submit, Star Wars submit. We're going to put a hashtag in front, do that there. And I believe it's click function open close curly brackets. I'll just double check to make sure I'm not misleading you guys. Yeah, sorry about that. There was a slight inconsistency. So this should be it. So we're gonna call jQuery. We're gonna call the button Star Wars submit. It has that ID. And when you click that, it creates an anonymous function. Don't need to worry about that. But whatever is inside this function is what appears on the screen. So let's say console.log. I see Sahil is in the chat, so we'll just give us a shout out to Sahil if that's all right with you. Sahil, so let's give that a shot. Missing closing parentheses, line 19, line 419. That's odd. Hold up. Wait a minute. After argument list. Yeah, it kind of sucks when it happens. Sorry, go
I
ahead.
feel like the parentheses at the very end should be where you are right now. I'm not sure though.
I'm not exactly
Like-
sure what's going on.
Remove the very last parentheses at the end.
You missed something in line 4. I think it's
Line
after where your click in quotes.
Two,
I
three,
think
four,
you're
five,
supposed
six,
to put
seven, eight,
parentheses
nine, 10.
there, maybe.
Oh, okay, because I think I know why.
Because the end of the function body should definitely be like a parentheses, not a bracket.
Actually, I don't. Just looking at like at the source code, I don't think it was a parentheses error. It was just because I think on in itself is supposed to be a function, and there was a missing comma. So hopefully, yeah, it was just a missing comma. It wasn't.
Right.
Yeah, 'cause usually when you see that error, it's because there's a parentheses missing, and that would have been correct. In this case, it was just a missing comma. So moment of truth. If we press red, we see Sahil. So Sahil, wherever you are right now, we are shouting out to you, and we wish you all the very best. Awesome. So now we know it works, and the next step is really trying to grab what's inside var, the input field, and plugging that into the JavaScript. So we can try that. So we can do we can say, let's say var user text equals sw name dot val. By the way, guys, this is not the best coding practice ever. Just common coding practice. Never name variables the same. But just because we're in a controlled environment, we'll make an exception today. So var user text is SW name. So again, that's what we have in the input field. And we're going to get the value, and we are going to print that into the console. So console.log user text. I forgot to mention, if anybody is using a browser encoding this, the best way to do this is just right-click. You should see inspect element. If you're on Chrome or Opera, Control-Shift-I, top right, console, and things should appear on the console over there for if you're using console.log. Cool, so let's give this a shot. I see Lewis is watching, so Lewis and I, we go a long way back. I'm gonna type Lewis. Lewis is undefined for some reason. I'll just look into the source code, see what's going on. Interesting. I believe we forgot the hashtag, which might be the cause. There we go. So now Lewis is defined. So Lewis, wherever you are, it's looking lit. So now we have we know that the on-click works, and we know it can read text from inside. Now the question is, how do we kind of plug this to the Star Wars API? So like Cryptonics mentioned a bit earlier, we're going to try to send this data in JSON format to the REST API. We're going to give that a shot. Does anybody know what type of function or what type of request we can use in JavaScript to request data from the Star Wars API?
A GET request?
Who said that? Yep, that is the correct answer. Yep, so Liquid Crystal LCD says a GET. That's exactly right. So we will be using that. I might make a few mistakes, so this might not work the first time, but we'll get it to work. So dot we'll use jQuery comes with the get, so I believe it's $, so jQuery.get. We are gonna plug in the URL. So if we go to swapi.tech, there should be a search somewhere. Search. My bad. Sorry about that. Yep, so all resources support a search parameter that filters a set of sources returned, etc., etc., etc. So if we copy this for people, I'll just copy that. I'll plug that into the Discord. Yeah, the plain text is fine. So you notice that you have your JavaScript, your URL over here to the API, and at the end, you might notice we have a question mark, name equals R2. Without going too much into details, this basically means we're sending a set of parameters to this particular API, so it's this particular web service. And one of the parameters we're sending is the name. So name equals R2. That's what we're trying to do. So that's, in essence, what the get function does. It's the equivalent of searching this. If I were to search this, and it retrieves the result. So I believe, if I'm not mistaken, we can then create a function, anonymous function. We're going to use a data variable. The reason why we use data is whatever this returns, this gets kind of plugged into this data variable we're using, and we'll be able to manipulate the data variable later on in this anonymous function. I'll just double check to make sure this works, that there's no typos or anything. So let's give this a run. If we were to type Lewis. Interesting. All right, so as you see, we have our jQuery.get. We're getting this API. We have this. We're using our an anonymous function to plug in the data. and then we are logging the data, and what we see is a response that says okay, message goes, etc., etc., etc. And so we're getting stuff. And although it's, I have to admit, REPL may not be the best, may not have the best console. If we go into, let's say Google Chrome, while I'm using Opera, it's almost the same thing. Let's say we would type R2D2, submit that. In this case, the results we have is this. So as Cryptonics mentioned, this is in the JSON format. You have, it's basically composed of, you can say keys and values. So we have message goes okay, and we have results. So in results, it's basically an array. So it's a list of things. The first thing is contains a bunch of properties. And then this is where, and we see there's eye color equals red. So kind of to recap, you have your data variable. In data, you have your results property. In results, you have your first object. In that first object, you click properties, and in properties, you go into eye color, and in eye color, you can then retrieve the variable red. So that's basically JSON. I know it can be maybe sometimes a bit convoluted. Yeah, it's a bit extenuous, a bit lengthy, but it is incredibly useful when it comes to organizing data, when it comes to retrieving certain data types. So our next step would be to create a function that can kind of what we call parse or process this huge JSON object and really return the eye color. So let's give that a shot. But actually, right before doing that, just looking at this, particularly what I highlighted here, R2, does anybody see what we need to change to get this to actually work?
Like change the R2 to the user input.
Exactly. So so there's a few ways to do this in JavaScript, but just for the sake of the workshop, the most explicit way, the most visible way is just saying plus concatenate user text. So I'm gonna do that. We won't, sadly, REPL doesn't allow us to see any differences. If I were to type, let's say, Luke, red, I can't see the actual details. But if you're using Google Chrome or Firefox, in the inspect element or developer toolbar, you should be able to see, if you use Luke, that the URL normally should return characteristics for Luke. Well, in this case, you might have to refresh a bit. You have Luke Skywalker, and which, if you're able to have different results every time, it means that your URL is correctly formatted. The next step is to create a function that can actually extract the data from this JSON file. But just going before doing that, up to this point, so for HTML and CSS, the JavaScript rather, does anybody have any questions or any bugs you guys are encountering?
For mine, it's not really actually printing anything when you press the submit button. Could you show me your JavaScript file quickly?
Yeah, it's right over here on the current screen share.
Oh, I guess my computer's just frozen. Kind of does that with Discord.
So like, you're saying that like once you go into inspect mode, like in the console, even though you have console.log, it doesn't actually print anything.
Yeah, it doesn't. And my code looks pretty similar to yours, so I think I might have missed some like small thing.
There's one really silly thing that might be the case. Is your script tag above or below your HTML code?
I think it's below, yeah.
Okay, so I mean, for some people, like usually, if people would have the script tag like somewhere above, it doesn't run, so it has to be below. Okay, I have a couple of ideas. Perhaps, I mean, so you're saying even like at the start, so like when we have console.log Sahil, you don't see Sahil appear on your console?
No, it doesn't appear. I
Okay.
feel like it's something I did with the tag, like the ID. It doesn't recognize it.
Do you have Jquery at the top?
Yeah, I do.
Okay. It might be the IDs. So the issue, I guess, on the HTML side is just the placement of the JavaScript. But like that shouldn't be an issue if it's at the end, as long as it's inside body, but like the last line of the body component, that's not an issue. So my guess is just maybe like make sure like the ID is correctly spelled. So your button ID, in this case, SW submit, is the same as the ID we have over here. There should be a hashtag in front. If you want, I could copy paste my JavaScript code into Discord if script. There we go.
Okay, thank you. I'll compare them and see what the issue was.
Yeah, no worries. Like if ever like by chance like you're still having the issue like at the end of the workshop, like feel free to screen share. I can happily like try to debug that. Sounds lit. So I guess next thing we need to do is kind of just to process the data objects, the huge JSON thingy that was returned. There are a lot of ways of doing it, but just for the sake of this workshop, the best way of doing that is creating a function. Has anybody ever encountered functions before? Okay, that's it's a bit of a weird question. Function basically is a block of code. So it's a block of code, like you're saying everything in this block of code is my function. So if I were to call my function, this block of code can be reused. It's like saying, for instance, like SpaceX, when they launch a rocket, every time they have to turn on one of their engines, they probably have a set of instructions that details, when are we going to release the cryogenic fluid? When are we going to ignite the engines? When are we going to control the orientation of the nozzle? All of this is code, and instead of writing the set of instructions a million times, you encapsulate this within a function. So using one line of code, you call all of this code that gets executed, that gets rerun every single time. And applying the same logic here, we're gonna create a function that, when run, it basically every single time easily processes the text that the JSON object returns. So let's call this function process JSON, or actually process swapI. To do this, we're going to use the JSON object. So we'll just call this SW data, just as a unique variable name. We're going to make sure that we can actually, that the function is actually correctly defined. So we'll have another console.log SW data. We are going to plug our function at the end of, right below console.log. So within our anonymous function, process swapI data. Just for fun, I'm gonna give a random shout out to Melvin's pet shark. So Melvin has a shark, which means this function works. Logic 101. Let's give this a shot. So he'll, oh, and look at that. Melvin has a shark, which means this function works. Cool. So this basically means that our function process swapI correctly can correctly parse the data. So I'll just delete the console.log since it gets a bit crowded. And the key thing is, just as we explored before, how do we want to get how we want to get the actual legit value, you can say, in this huge JSON file. So there's a way of doing this, which is pretty neat. So we're going to create a new variable called, let's call this variable name, variable SW. Let's call this variable retrieve name, or let's call it data name. Data name is equal to SW data. Sorry, and using a system of dots, using dots, we can specify what we want inside. So we can see if you're using a Chrome inspect element toolbox, you have results, first element, so forth and so forth. So kind of to start off, we'll use results dot 0, because we're looking, sorry, results, we're going to use 0 since it's the 0th or the first element in the results array. And then and then after this point, it gets really fun because we're just gonna try to zero down into how we want to get the person's name. So I'm just gonna give a random shout out to Danny99. Danny, do you have any idea how we can zero on specifically to this person's name using JSON format?
Yes. First, I think you would reference the object name.
Object. Yep.
So what's the object name? It's
SW data in this case.
okay. SW data dot properties dot name.
Yep.
Right.
The properties. There it goes. Exactly. So properties dot name. Thanks, Danny. I'm just making sure that this works. We're gonna log that. So we're gonna run this. I'm gonna call Mace for Mace window. And as we see, Melvin has a shark, so this means this function works. Thanks, Melvin. And console.log Mace window. So again, I can't exactly display everything using REPL because it gets really messy. But if we're using Chrome or legit any legitimate web browser, you have, like Danny just said, results, the 0th element, properties, name. We have Mace window, and now we want to have eye color because why not? So we'll create another variable data eye color. I'm gonna just give a random call out. Let's say Ishan. Ishan, are you there?
Kind of a beginner, so I don't really know much.
No worries, mate. Like, so it's legit. Like, it's legit sick. So like, it's just we're trying to get the eye color. I mean, in this case, like last time we called swdata.results 0th element dot properties dot name. From your point of view, like, is there anything we should change if we want to get eye color?
Change to get the eye color.
Yeah, like what difference? What's the difference we need between what we did like in this line,
Mm-hmm.
and what we need to do to get eye color?
Honestly, I'm not sure.
Okay, no worries, mate. But like, if you go in properties, you see how like in properties you have like all these like different value, like different keys. You see how you have name over here. And then we have eye color as well. But like, what's interesting to note is that all of these characteristics are all in properties. Like they're all on the same level, we can say. So because they're in the same level, we can say, okay, well, since they're all in properties, we'll just replace name with eye color, I believe. We're gonna log data eye color. Ishan, do you watch Star Wars?
Oh, not really.
Oh, okay, no worries. Does anybody have a favorite character they wanna stock?
Darth Vader.
Darth. All right, Darth Vader. Cool. So if we run this, we have Darth Vader, and data eye color gives us yellow. So I don't know if Darth Vader actually has yellow eyes, but I mean it's one of life's greatest mysteries. So that's another debate. But bottom line is, if this is anybody's first time coding, super simple. Just kind of connect the dots. So SW data dot results 0 properties eye color, which legit really is just SW data dot results 0 properties eye color. So not sure if it's visible on the stream, but if you just mouse hover any of these properties, Chrome actually lists out the actual path. So long story short, for JSONs, um, it's legit just kind of connecting the dots. So you start with like the outermost keys. In this case, it would be results, and you just narrow down your way into the more specific ones. So um, that's kind of what we have. And now what we want to do is we want to make this appear on the HTML page, because it's really sick to have all this in the console. But if you're not a developer, however cool this is, nothing's changing here. Does anybody have any ideas of what we can do to make the console appear on the HTML page?
I guess
Yeah.
since we gave an ID to the text in the HTML file, we could change it in the JSON file with the eye color and the name.
Yep, that's legit what needs to be done. Let me just check the source code to get the actual method. Okay, got it. So the ID, I believe, was SW text. So we're going to use Jquery hashtag SW text .html, and we just plug in, let's say, I'm gonna give a shout out. Does anybody want a shout out? I'm gonna plug in Krish. So Krish is our volunteer. Sorry for putting you on the spot. Let's see if this works. Darth Vader, red, and you see Krish appears over here. So this works, and now we just want to make data name and eye color also appear in SW text. There's a neat way we can do is in JavaScript, and basically many programming languages, you can concatenate strings. So strings are basically text. So anything that's text is within quotation marks, so open close quotation. That's a string, and we can say var. Let's call this return text equals data name plus data eye color. Let's give that a shot. And in HTML, we're just going to plug in return text. Let's give this a shot. Darth Vader. What do we have? Darth Vader yellow. So this is like nice, but not nice. Does anybody want to suggest a different phrasing we can use to have a prettier return text? Melted, do you have any idea by chance?
No, I don't. Sorry. I'm pretty new to coding myself, so.
No worries, all good. I mean, there's a lot of ways of doing this, but one kind of like, I guess the easiest way is just concatenating using plus signs. So we're going to add a new string in the middle. Darth Vader has eyes that are plus data eye color. So if you were to run this, let's type R2D2. R2D2 has eyes that are red. So just notice that there's a space before has and after R. since JavaScript takes strings like commands literally. So actually, I think we're pretty much done. I mean, I'm a bit surprised that it only took an hour for a lot of talking, a lot of like debugging to get us done, but I think this is pretty much it, at least for the main component. And there was one thing that I kept for last, but I guess it would be a good time to talk about it. Would be the styling of a document. But before going to styling, does anybody have any questions on what we have right now? Like any bugs or any problems, any errors you guys are having? Cool. I mean, if anybody has any errors, like please don't be shy to like shout out, even if it might seem silly to you. I mean, we all learned how to code somewhere, and it's like if there's any bugs, like please don't feel shy because everybody learns. Everybody has hit a wall at one point, and like this is like legit a really cool opportunity to kind of get together and solve stuff. So that's what we have right now. A couple of things that I might not have mentioned. I might have went over a bit too quickly. There's something called comments that are commonly used in code. Comments common. Essentially, in um, in HTML, the comments usually are, I'm not sure how you call this, like bracket exclamation dash dash comment dash dash close bracket. So this is not read. This is meant to only be read by a programmer and not by the computer. Comments are legit because the computers ignore them, but they allow human programmers to kind of track what we have, what's going on in the file and what's doing what. I feel like it'd be a good idea to kind of to comment out the JavaScript code. It is commented on the GitHub, so this probably is sufficient. If you guys want, we can comment this out at the end. Cool. Now we're going to move on to stylistics. I'll be honest, guys. I'm not a front-end developer. I'm a back-end developer. So in web dev, usually you have the front end. Today, all we've done today is front end. So everything that codes a website. The backend, on the contrary, is probably what SwapPy uses. SwapPy, I believe, is coded in Python with Django, for those who might be familiar. So SwapPy basically, handles the database queries, handles the API hosting and stuff. So this is the backend. Um, it basically does all of the churning, all of the mechanical stuff, while the front end, HTML, CSS, and JavaScript only does the rendering and the displaying stuff. Because I consider myself to be more of a backend developer, I have a tendency of making very, very minimal front ends. It might be a default. It's just front end can be quite lengthy to perfect. So that's why it's extremely minimal. So we're about to make this a bit more exciting. So kind of just like what we've done with jQuery, we can import JavaScript libraries. I just realized there is a minor detail. This is not a huge concern, but it's best. But the script should be before the CSS link tag, just because of order of imports. It won't affect us today, but it's just a cool coding practice to have. So there's a lot of really cool CSS frameworks we can use to make our website instantaneously look a lot better. The most popular one is Bootstrap. Not sure if this is going to work. Hold up. Get bootstrap.com. We're not going to use Bootstrap today just because there are some import conflicts that I don't want to get into due to jQuery. So instead, we'll be using something called mini CSS. So mini CSS is not exactly Bootstrap, so it's not as fully fledged. Doesn't have all of the components that Bootstrap has. However, mini CSS is just at least from my personal point of view, it's a really cool way of just getting to master CSS at its most basic. So get started. You could use, yep, so just like how we used script to import some source code from some website. So if you guys are curious, if you want to search this, you basically have all the JavaScript jQuery that we're using. Similarly, that's the case for our CSS. So when using mini CSS, if we were to search what we have over here, I'm gonna search that. It basically pulls up all the CSS that we'll be using. So in this case, you can either use raw Git or CDNJS. Doesn't really matter. You copy one of the two, and make sure that you insert it above your link to your customized CSS style sheet. So we have that there. Let's run this, and just keep your eyes focused on the difference before and after. So before, you can see this is like some 1996 style website, Times New Roman, black and gray, nothing really special. I'm gonna run this, and notice how the background changed color. Things are rounder, things are nicer. The text is in sans serif, so that's already like a nice add-on. It's a bit more of a modern touch. And if we were to say, I don't know, Han Solo, red. Han Solo has eyes that are brown. We can already see that the layout looks a bit nicer. And I guess it's cool to kind of work around with this. But like the last thing we can do is have like custom CSS. So there's a lot of things that we can do using CSS. But I think what could be interesting is saying, okay, everything that's in SW text, let's assign it. Let's override and make it a certain color. So we're going to call SW text. So just like JavaScript, when you call ID, you precede it with the hashtag SW text. There's a property called color, and we're just gonna, well, in this case we have a set of colors. Does anybody have a favorite color they want to use?
Azure.
Azure, it's actually I would refrain from using Azure because it might not be too visible.
Yeah, it's not.
Hold up. So let's see. T. Yeah, it's a bit not visible. Any alternative suggestions?
I'd say violet.
Yeah. There you go. So apparently Jabba the Hutt has orange eyes. I did not know that, but now we do. So that's that. There is one last thing that is present in the GitHub that's not present here yet. There is a bit of error handling. So if ever like you type something completely random, such as something really like out of touch, there might sometimes be an error in the JavaScript, though it doesn't seem to be the case here. So it's just a bit of error handling that appears in the GitHub, but that we didn't cover today because it's not really a key component. Sorry, I think my Wi-Fi just cut for like a second. Do you guys hear me?
Yes.
Awesome. Does anybody have any questions or any things anybody wants to revisit? I'm just looking through some of the Discord chats just to see if there's any.
Excuse me?
Yep.
Could you go back to your HTML file for a second? Mine stopped working after I put the mini CSS thing in.
Oh, no worries. Is this Melvin?
Yes, yes.
Yeah. Here's the Here's the HTML.
Okay, because like now it just says cannot read properties of undefined. So I'm trying to figure out what went wrong.
Does the CSS render though?
Oh, I haven't really got the mini CSS, yeah. But
Okay. If you were to type in, let's say, like R2 or like Han Solo, does that give you a result?
oh, okay, wait, I think it just started working again.
Yeah.
Okay, thanks.
No problem. Because it's possible, like the JavaScript sometimes it has like some bugs. Though usually in this case the bugs are not apparent for the user. So I mean, it's not perfect, but at least from a user point of view, there's no like fatal or like really problematic bugs.
Just a question: what happens like when you have a JavaScript bug and you're running a website? Because when that happens, it doesn't really do anything in our like REPL thing.
When you have a What happens when you have a bug? When
Like if
when you're running.
like let's say it's like Walmart.ca and they have like a JavaScript bug, would the whole website just crash?
I guess I mean I guess it depends on where the error is and like how serious it is. Because nowadays, like a lot of websites depend on JavaScript to kind of, you can say like do a lot of things like authenticate users to process data and stuff. Um, if your error lies in like the user login, then like and you're trying to log into like your email account, then likely if you have an error at the login stage, likely everything else is gonna fail. But if it's like a really minor error, like something like displaying whether somebody has read an email or not, it's a small error, but it likely wouldn't affect like the user drastically. So I guess if you have an error in your JavaScript, if it does happen, the severity of the error really depends on how on where it's located, whether it's something that's really like high level or something that's really minor and insignificant. There is one thing though that I came across a bit earlier today that I think could be of interest. So GitHub open APIs. So today we used a Star Wars API, which is it's fun, but like realistically, will this help anybody in their hackathon? Unless you guys want to calculate the body mass index of Star Wars characters, it's a bit tricky to implement this into a real project. However, there is a really sick GitHub page that shows you a huge list of open APIs that most of them are free to use and require no authentication or no verification codes. So this could be particularly interesting for anybody who wants to use APIs. Something that I came across earlier today is weather. So I believe it was OD weather, if I'm not mistaken. Okay, I'm not exactly sure which one it was, but essentially, like you can access the weather for like literally any location. There's also a Spotify one that I've known for a bit. This one's a bit more complex to use, but as long as you can figure out how to generate an authentication key when a user logs in, you can basically access anybody's like music preferences and suggest songs for that. There's a lot of really cool things that you guys can use. Some of them, for those that have no authentication on HTTPS, those are really, really simple to use. Those that have API keys, usually when accounts are involved, trickier, but it's still relatively really simple to use. So I guess I'll send this into the to the Discord. So this could be potentially really, really cool to use. And yeah, that's really about it. So I I guess unless anybody has any other questions, maybe the curious team would like to maybe wrap up or make a few remarks. I mean, the floor is open.
Hello. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Oh, I'm just curious as you briefly went over jQuery, but could you explain it what it does again, just for those who don't know, including
No,
me?
no problem. Melvin, right?
Yes.
Awesome. So, uh, to kind of start from to go from the start, JavaScript is basically all of the code that performs actions on your website. jQuery in itself is a JavaScript library. So it's a set of pre-written functions that are used on your website. So, for instance, in this case, we use jQuery. We use a jQuery function to access specific buttons, to access text, to perform a GET request, to access a GET request. Um, so instead of like writing code from scratch, by importing jQuery, we're basically using pre-written functions to make coding a lot more easier and streamlined. I'm not sure if that answers your question.
Okay. Thank you.
No problem. And I mean, for those who are interested in jQuery, I believe it's MDN that maintains it. It's MDN. jQuery. They do have solid documentation on all of the aspects in jQuery. So whether, I mean, I personally am not the most knowledgeable person about jQuery, but the Mozilla docs are very, very well defined and can provide functionality, all the functionality that you need. Awesome. I mean, if anybody has any personal more questions, or if anybody wanted to, get in touch over the next while a bit, or just anything, I'm my Discord handle is Laurel. I mean, it'd be best if you guys send me just a direct DM over Discord if you guys have any questions for hackathon or for anything in general. More than happy to help out. For those who don't know me personally, I guess I kind of forgot to introduce myself at the start. I'm a second student. I'm a second year student at Marianopolis. I initially started coding just because at the time, I wanted to try something out, but I really fell in love with it because coding, um, you know, it's not just a tool; it's a way to self-express, to really create solutions to help others that can be reused and cloned over and over again. So personally, I fell in love with it. I do a lot of Python. I've gotten a bit into web dev and mobile lately, but Python is really I tr- I what I do really, really often. And I absolutely love it. So that's a bit of who I am. And yeah, so I guess that's kind of it for today. Again, feel free to send me a text over Discord if you guys have anything. And I guess I'll pass the mic back to the curious organizers. So I'll be here if anybody needs me.